Hi everyone, Julia Usher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. Happy pre-Valentine's Day. Every now and then I like to take a break from detailed cookie decorating, like those detailed hearts I did for you last week, which are sitting back on the counter there, to do something simpler, not necessarily edible, and definitely in keeping with my repurposing philosophy. And that's exactly what I have here for you today. I'm making a lovely Valentine's gift that makes use of plain craft paper boxes. You could also use old heart-shaped candy boxes and turning them into gorgeous packages that make gifts in their own right, or you could stuff some of my cookies into them or other treats into them as Valentine's gifts. There's nothing I like more really in life, apart from cookie decorating and breathing life into new things. It puts a smile on my face when people see something that they didn't quite expect in a slightly new format, and I hope that this project does the same for you. So let's talk about what we need for this project. Again, simple heart-shaped craft boxes. I've got them in two sizes. The big is particularly good for filling with cookies. The others might be more suited to smaller trinkets. These are about 4 1/4, 4 1/2 by 2 inches tall. The bigger ones are more like 6 to 7 inches across and 3 inches deep. And I'll have the exact dimensions and sources in the video description. As far as repurposing goes, the breathing of life into old objects, I'm going to be covering these with a combination of vintage magazine pages. I've actually got the pages from a songbook here. Old Valentines. I tend to choose old Valentines that aren't perfect, that already have been disrupted, so I don't feel so guilty about tearing them apart. Same thing with postcards. Even shards and little odd irregular pieces can look good on top of the boxes. In addition, you're going to want some more solid, perhaps even new papers if you can't find a lot of vintage stuff. I've got some homemade papers here in small form, larger form homemade papers or wrapping paper for the sides of the box. And then lastly, for dimensional elements on top, you'll want an array of ribbons. I've got a combination of vintage ones that I got at my antiques mall, as well as newer, more shimmery trims, some with texture, some thin, some thick. The key is you want a broad range of styles and textures here to add interest. And then lastly, vintage elements to go on top. I'm actually using costume jewelry on some that make great accents. They can also be pulled off after the box is used and received and saved as a keepsake. Or you could use old-fashioned silk flowers, and I've got a range of them here. Now to put these all in the boxes, you don't need much, but I do recommend 3 different types of glue, ranging from least adhesive to most adhesive. Least adhesive is the spray adhesive. I usually use this behind long sheets of paper where I don't want a lot of bumpy glue underneath, but it sometimes lifts over time, or it sometimes isn't enough to secure heavier papers like these homemade papers, in which case I would then move to something stronger like Mod Podge, which I apply with sponge brushes. And then lastly, in sticking down or tacking down heavy cords and these elements here, I'll use my glue gun with a glue stick. That's really all there is to it. I've got quite an assortment here. When I first started making these projects, I started out relatively simple. I did some for my book Cookie Swap, which you'll see scrolling overhead. I did them fairly plain because I had some really elaborate cookies going inside. But as I'm a more is more person, I've really jazzed these up here. The key to using lots of different elements is working within a fairly restricted color palette so that when you put all these things together, it doesn't look hodgepodge, but rather it harmonizes. So you'll see here I've really got a palette of browns, golds, reds, with some cream colors and pinks tossed in. So let's get started and I'll show you how to put this together. I'm going to do a big box for you just because I can get more on the lid, and you know I'm a more is more person. I did want to comment on the items I pre-selected for the box. It's typical for me to pre-select items to kind of visualize them while not glued on to make sure I've got the right combination of things before I start cutting into things that might be better used on another project. So what I'm envisioning for the base of the box is a long strip pre-cut of that wrapping paper I showed you, possibly another trim on top of it if it doesn't look too busy, and this brown cording at the bottom. Then moving on to the lid elements, I'm envisioning the music being partially exposed on the top with a vintage Valentine, maybe askew. I definitely need something to cover the side of the lid to go here. So I'm thinking this is the perfect size and color ribbon. And then for a little hint of sparkle and pizzazz, I'm choosing a brighter, thinner ribbon with a little bit of glitter in it. The last element to go on top, the flower, I'm not quite sure yet. I love the shape of this rose, but I think its color might be too similar to the background color to really show up. So I may, depending on how things look in the final assembly, use that piece instead. So let's move on. I'm going to start with the bottom of the box first because it's kind of the easiest part. So the first step is just cutting paper to fit all the way around the box and just shy of the top of the box. I like to cut it back from the top of the box just so that when I put it on the lid I don't mess up the paper as much there. I also like to put the straightest edge, if there is one, towards the top of the box. That's because I'm likely not to put any trims there and I'll just get a cleaner look that way. Now this is a relatively thin piece of paper, so the spray adhesive, our least strong glue, is likely to work fairly well for the most part. Just give it a nice even coat at a distance. You don't want too much accumulation anywhere because it can bleed through and leave a spot. While the glue is still tacky, just anchor it at the apex of the heart. I think the seam is less likely to show there than anywhere else on the box. And once you've got it positioned, pull the paper taut and just work it around the sides of the box as best you can, keeping it flat all the way around. Now this is a relatively heavy homemade paper, so I might need to secure it with a little more heavy-duty glue, the Mod Podge, at the apex of the heart if these two end pieces should not stick together. Let's see. I think they're doing pretty well, so it probably doesn't need any Mod Podge there. However, there's an area here at the point of the heart towards the top that's lifting away from the edge, so I am going to tack that with some Mod Podge using my sponge brush. This is a matte Mod Podge, so it will dry completely flat, so if a little bit of it gets on front of the paper, not a problem at all. It'll just disappear and you won't see it. Now onto the trim. This is a pretty heavy trim, relatively speaking, so I'm going to advance to my glue gun, the heaviest of the glues we're working with. And because the trim is see-through, I don't want to use glue all the way along the length of it because I'm likely to see that glue through the ribbon. So I'm just going to tack it down with spots of glue here and there, pulling the ribbon taut as I go. Now the thing about the glue gun is the glue loves to leave threads, so you'll want to pull those off as you work. And it's especially important to anchor here at the point of the heart because ribbons tend to like to pull away here. So I'm going to anchor it very close to the point on one side and also very close to it immediately on the other side. And we'll continue to tack in this process all the way around. Of course, you want to trim it to fit and give it a last tack here at the apex. Now there's a little waviness at the bottom of the ribbon, but I think I can conceal that with the next trim that's going down, which is this brown cord that you see. It too is relatively heavy, so we're going to anchor it with the glue gun. But it isn't see-through, so I'll probably use more glue along the entire length of the cord. And again, it's just a gluing and sticking process, pulling the cord taut as you go all the way around. And again, snip it to fit. And you want to glue it pretty quickly after you snip because the cord has a tendency to unravel. And there she is, all done. Let's move on to the lid. I want to use this old songbook page for the top of the box. And I do want the title to show, so I just want to position it where I want it before I trim it back. I think that's good. So I'm going to hold onto that paper tightly and then trim about 1/2 inch away from the edge of the box all the way around because I want a little bit of paper to overhang the edge of the box so it looks like a continuous wrap. And that way when I put the ribbon up, it'll cover the edge of the paper. So that looks pretty good. I'll ultimately put the other Valentine like so, most likely. Now this is a pretty thin piece of paper, so I'm going to use the spray adhesive again. At least to secure it to the very top of the lid. And now to anchor the sides, you'll notice that I'll be cutting notches into the paper as I go. Wherever there's a lot of paper accumulation, I want to cut notches because that'll make it easier for the paper to go down without creating lots of folds. And we don't want a lot of folds here because we need to lay that ribbon really flat around the sides. I am using Mod Podge here because the spray adhesive won't be enough to tack it down. And plus I don't want to spray the whole lid now and get it all tacky with the spray adhesive. So here I'm cutting a notch because I've got a surplus of paper around these bends and I want to get some of it out so that everything lies super flat. So this is just a process of gluing, pressing down, pressing down, pressing down to make sure that those pleats are completely flat. And that's again to ensure that the ribbon lies very flat. You always want to cut a slit at the points to get rid of that excess paper. So that's looking nice and neat there at the point with the slit. And we just want to continue this process, cutting notches and securing the paper all the way around. Now again, I like to visualize the design as I go. Here I want to make sure the Valentine's properly placed so that when I trim it back, it all looks good. And I'll be trimming the Valentine back just to the edge of the box. It's pretty thick, and I don't want to wrap it over the edge because otherwise the ribbon won't lie flat. So I've got it in a good orientation, I think. So I'm going to do just exactly what I did before. Hold on to it, turn it over, but this time I'm going to cut right to the edge of the lid. That looks good at the bottom, so I just need to cut the excess off here at the top. Now because this is a relatively thick piece, I'm going to use the Mod Podge here. The spray adhesive won't be enough. I did want to get that Valentine all the way to the edge of the box and I'm just shy of it, but I think that's going to be okay. This is a very textural piece and very forgiving as far as the design goes. Now, I've got a remnant here from another Valentine with a heart on it, and I think I want to stick that to the right. Again, just visualizing the pieces. Holding that down and trimming it back all the way to the edge as I did before. I'm going to try the Mod Podge again here and see how it responds to this paper. Every paper is a little bit different, and this one's a little bit sheer and it's actually curling. It's curling more than I expected with the Mod Podge. So I'm going to advance to the glue gun again and tack this thing down once and for all. Yes, that's working much better. Now let's see how that looks with the rest of the box. Yes, I think that brown ribbon will do just fine. This is a relatively heavy piece, so just like we did on the box bottom, we're going to tack this down with the glue gun. Applying glue in spots and pulling the ribbon taut as I go. And making sure, of course, the ribbon covers the paper at the top completely. That'll create a nice clean edge. Okay, here's my lid, mostly completed, but I'm having a little bit of a design dilemma. First of all, this paper, as you saw, really reacted to the Mod Podge for some reason and really curled up, so I had to use the glue gun to stick down the edges, but even so, it's buckling a little bit over here more than I would like. It's a very textural piece, so that's not the end of the world. But instead of placing my bow here, I think I am going to orient it here so I hide some of that buckling, but you still see a suggestion of it. And I do think I'm going to use that flower because I love its perfect shape. The only issue I'm not sure about is whether to add a complementary piece of this red ribbon down over this brown, just to have some element from the very top tying into the side. I do think that would look nice, but since I'm not sure at this point, I'm going to leave it off, and if I want to add it later once the box is completely assembled, I can do that. It's an easy thing to attach at the end. So the rest is just a gluing process. So let's move on to sticking on the last few pieces, the bow and the flower. I do love the shape of this flower, so I'm just going to use it, even if it is very close in color to what's behind it. Trim down those ribbons so they don't hang too long over the sides of the box, and we're done. So here's my finished project, looking very vintage and repurposed with lots of layers and textures, as I promised at the start of this video. I really wanted to go more is more and show you how to work with a range of different textured materials, cloth, paper, ribbon, etc., and a range of different glues, so you have a range of possibilities when you approach this project. In the process of doing that, I went definitely more is more on the lid, and maybe more is more on the box bottom too. So one thing you always want to remember as you're designing is to make sure they look good together, or the best they can possibly be, and well balanced together. In retrospect, I might have taken this ribbon off of this one and simplified this box bottom, but that's not a big deal. The beauty of this project is I can just grab another plain box bottom. They're very inexpensive. Do a simpler bottom, pair it with a more jazzy lid, or vice versa. Do a jazzy bottom and pair it with a simpler lid. Any which way you want to approach it is fine. The techniques are all the same. The other cool thing about this project is it can really be done in any color palette. Here I've got a slightly more subdued one with pink and still accents of green, taupes, and browns. I've used many of the same elements. Vintage Valentine here, old magazine page here, but I've swapped in some costume jewelry for the silk flower. It too has been hot glued down and it stays relatively intact, or I should say very intact. I've got a whole host of other styles circulating overhead to give you inspiration. I chose this particular box to end with because its color palette marries really well with these stenciled cookies that I did in a previous video shoot. And I'm just going to tuck a few inside for my significant other. If you haven't seen this video, I encourage you to jump on over to it because it's a great Valentine's Day gift in and of itself. Till next video, live sweetly and happy Valentine's Day.